All right, I am all set.
All right, well, thanks everybody for coming to this week's Reeves Memorial Weather Briefing. It's Halloween, so please help yourself to some candy if you haven't already. I know I will be having more pink hats because they are fantastic. Our speaker this week is Ben Reppert. If you work with Weather World or anything, you probably have run into Ben. Ben, what else do you do here?
I am in our department's online teaching program. I live over in EES building, which is just over the bridge across Atherton Street. So that's my primary focus, but they'd let me come over to this side of the road and have a little fun every now and again.
Yes. Yes. Oh, Ben, take it away.
All right, so you help yourself to candy. I will lie and say that I brought it, but I will now tell the truth and say that I did not bring it. But help yourself to candy. Happy Halloween. It's Marissa Ferger's favorite day, or at least almost favorite day of the year. So leading with the weather in the next coming days around here is not, certainly for this time of the year, it's not the most exciting. We'll talk about it, but I figured I'd start out by, I tend to pick these dates around the end of a month or the start of a month, because I just like to wrap some things up and speculate as to what it could mean, or more realistically, what it probably won't mean, because a lot of times dots are not necessarily meant to be connected. But some highlights from October 2022 here in State College, because we are a co-op site. Our month of October technically ended about 4.5 hours ago. So we have all the data for the month of October. Temperature-wise, against the complete period of record, which is 126 years, ended up about 0.7 of a degree below average. It'll end up tied as 60th coolest out of 126 years, so barely in the bottom half. But more interestingly enough, it was our coolest October since 2011. So Octobers, at least around here recently, have been on the milder side. As far as the breakdown of days, 16 out of 31 days were below average, 4 days were sort of in that average range, and then 11 were above. And at least around here, it was fairly interesting to see that it was more so driven by the overnights, or at least the lows, the mins, than the maxes. So mins were a little more than 2 degrees below the long-term mean. Maxes were actually a little bit above the long-term mean. So at least any of the long-time State College folks know that, especially recently, it's been hard to get a month where the sort of the min temps determine things, at least on the cool side. And compared to last year, any of you that were here last year, maybe you've forgotten by now, maybe you remember, but October 2021 was very warm. In State College, it was the warmest October on record. And so this October, compared to last, was more than 8 degrees cooler. So certainly a much more fall feeling month in terms of October. 2 inches of precipitation right on the dot, about 1.5 inches below average. A lot of that was front loaded. Since the middle of the month, we've only measured 3/100ths of an inch at the co-op site here through 8 a.m. this morning. I don't know what fell between, or if anything fell measurably between 8 a.m. and now, but out of that 2 inches of liquid, just about all of it came before the middle of the month. So in the last couple of weeks, we've turned quite dry again here locally. And this will also now go down as our driest October since 2008. Just a little bit more on the chilly nights to put some perspective on this. When you average all 31 of our mins together this month, you get 40.6. Again, that's the lowest such value since 2008. Last October, when you averaged the 31 overnights together, it was 51.1, which was by far a record, and certainly not exactly October feeling. This year, 4 days, we had a min temp of 32 or lower. That's the most in an October since 2013. Our first freeze came on the 21st. It was a week later than the long-term mean, 2 weeks earlier than last year. It's interesting that 5 of the last 10 years, we've had to wait until November to get our first 32 degree or lower reading here. Also, almost half the days this month had lows in the 30s, 39 or lower. Once again, that is the most in an October since 2008. Last year, we only had 1 day where the overnight low dropped below 39 or to 39 or below in the month of October. Again, if you go back before the mid 2000s, these stats wouldn't exactly be anything too exciting, but around here, and I know we've chatted about this before about, to what extent all the new construction and especially this IST bridge or Westgate Bridge just to our northwest has an effect on that, especially on the low side. But in recent Octobers, this one at least stands out as a chillier one compared to many of the recent past. As far as the state goes as a whole, the numbers, of course, it'll take a little while for them to be crunched, probably a couple of weeks by the National Centers for Environmental Information, but it will go down with a negative sign in front of it. The question will just be exactly how far, probably not by much. But some rough back of the envelope calculations suggest that this will be the first cooler than average October statewide since 2009. Again, it probably won't be much below, but the first one with a negative sign in 13 years. As far as precipitation is concerned, the east was wetter than average. A lot of that was thanks to the first week or so of the month where we had that sluggish, slow-moving coastal low that arguably had some bits and pieces of Ian associated with it. Anyone who went to the Northwestern game, yeah, the storm that soaked everyone and probably didn't allow you to dry out for about a week. Elsewhere, though, in the state, it was rather dry. Just some stats for a few of the sites. And again, for the rest of these sites, there's still some time left to maybe add on a bit. But as it stands now, Philly's having its wettest October since 05, which there was a tropical storm in 05 that made that month particularly wet. I want to say it was Tammy, but I don't remember. But in any case, Philly, wettest since 05, 9th wettest on record. Allentown, 20th wettest out of 111 years. But meanwhile, some other side of the state, it's the other effect. Pittsburgh, driest October since 97, and the 36th driest out of 152 years. Bradford is having their driest October since 99, and out of 88 years on record, 19th driest. Also, quite a few locations in central and western Pennsylvania had their first measurable snow just a couple of weeks ago. Hello. Measurable snow, yes, 1/10 of an inch or more. So flakes in the air, recording a trace doesn't count as measurable. Quite a few more locations had a trace of snow recorded, including here at our co-op site. But here's the map season to date so far through 12Z today. Higher ground of western and northern Pennsylvania. Pretty much that's the limitation as to who's seen it so far this year. The upper Midwest, fairly early season storm, at least for some folks. I think Madison had one of their earliest, Madison, Wisconsin, that is. I think they had one of their earliest measurable snows on record. The West has been starting to add it up recently, especially in the mountain towns. Ski resorts obviously loving it. And out there, especially this week, with the main trough in the jet stream out west, some more snow opportunities are on the way there. Here are the numbers. These are this data off of XMASIS, which is a treasure trove of information, so much so that you can get lost when you go into it. But this sort of ingests all of the airport data, the co-op data, the CocoRa's volunteer network data. So it's all in one place. So far this month, these are the only locations in Pennsylvania that have at least reported measurable snow of 1/10 of an inch or more. Laurel Summit in Somerset County is currently leading the charge with 1.2. Here we are representing with a trace. Interestingly enough, Philadelphia International Airport, the trace there, it's not a typo, but it's not for snow. They actually had a thunderstorm or a thunder shower with some hail a couple of weeks ago. One of the setups where we had a lot of cool air aloft, the airport actually observed some pea-sized hail, which goes down as solid precipitation. So that's just an interesting tidbit there that, no, this is not a typo, but it is not for snow that has happened there yet. Couple more things. Again, I don't want to dwell on this too much, but this I think is the more interesting stuff than the weather around here the next few days. This is this October's departure from average temperature map, at least through and including all of Saturday's data. This won't change too much once all the final numbers are in, but again, below average, but it won't be by much statewide. The biggest contributions of that will be for the southern half of the state. This is last year, where 5 to 9 degrees above average statewide, which contributed to, again, warmest October on record last year here. For Pennsylvania, last year was the second warmest overall, but in year-to-year turnover, quite a flip. As far as how the U.S. is concerned, the most negative departures for the month of October are actually to our south, through the Appalachians, the Southeast, even down into northern Florida. If it's been warm anywhere, that's been reserved for central and northern New England, and then much of the West. And the last thing I'll say on this, again, I always like to do these around ends of months, when we can sort of, make connections between what's happened recently and what could theoretically happen in the future. But this is a look at precipitation so far this year, at least in terms of compared to average. Areas that are in any sort of this olive green color or farther into the greens, that's above average precipitation year to date. Anyone in this light yellow tannish color or deeper into yellows, oranges, and reds, that's below average. Couple of things stood out to me on this map. Now, keep in mind, this is 10 months worth of data. So when you start to see some fairly substantial departures one way or the other, averaged over 10 months, that's when you can start to say or identify regions where it's been somewhat notable. Biggest thing that stuck out to me was the fact that the plains this year have been having overall a very dry year. It's been contributing to all the Mississippi water woes that have been making news as of late, especially this time of the year. It's harvest season, and that is an incredibly important waterway for moving goods and commerce around. If anyone wants 3.5 minutes of very educational material, humble plug for John Neese's most recent Weather-Wise segment. Give it a watch if you haven't. A lot of good stuff in there about the mighty Mississippi not being so mighty as of late. Locally here, looking at it for the first 10 months of the year, Pennsylvania around average, but central northern PA, if there's been an area that has not gotten to adequate rain in terms of the 10 months put together, it's sort of the central swath. Eastern PA is made up from recent deficits, mostly thanks to some wetness in September and early October. The other thing that struck me when looking at this is, while it's sort of an even split between above and below, if you just sort of take a broad brush approach, I mean, that might not even be true. There's more of this yellowy color than the first green color, but anyone that's in the green, it's not the deep greens. I mean, if anything, the belows are having a more below average 10 months of the year, whereas anyone who's having an above average 10 months, first 10 months of the year, it's not by a lot. You've got, if anything, the only really dark greens are predominantly found in the Southwest, where the monsoon season was rather robust earlier this year. So overall, in general, dryness winning out through the U.S. So I thought, okay, well, this struck me as something interesting. Dry in the Great Plains for not just a few weeks or a month, but really for a very long period of time. So I decided to see, okay, I looked at what happened following years where the Great Plains were very dry. And I also looked at, okay, what happened in years when Pennsylvania had a cooler than average October, mostly because, again, pending final number crunching, this is probably our first cooler than average October statewide in 13 years. So I was, okay, there's 14 years where those two things overlap in the last 100 years. There they are on the left. So I just like to pose some questions. Does it mean anything for November? Does it mean anything for the winter? Temperature wise, this is November here on the map. If anything, and again, I sometimes take these with a grain of salt because they're now comparing against the most recent 30-year climatology. And with a lot of years from early in the 20th century in here, it's a little bit easier for cool anomalies to show up on maps like these than warm ones against the new climatology because the baseline's gone up a little bit. So I like to take this with a grain of salt, but from a pattern standpoint, you could argue that if there's, again, based on these years, this analog signal, if a part of the nation would favor cool, it is west. Around Pennsylvania, it's not colored in, but there are some dollops of green sort of nearby. So the signal based on this analog set for November would favor cooler in the west, mildish in the east, which coincidentally, at least how the month of November looks to start, the pattern will probably look somewhat like that. Precip, again, if anything out of those years shows up, it's that the plains stay dry. In Pennsylvania, there's sort of this dry west, wet east dichotomy. Again, this is just one set of analog years, but nevertheless, some interesting things can tend to show up out of these. What about the winter? I don't know if anybody in here, snow lovers, snow haters. How do we feel about it? Love. Hate. Okay, so the love outweighs the hate. Again, I don't like to put too much stock into these, but to at least torque up if anyone loves it cold, then this analog set had a bit of a chilly favoring for the immediately following December, January, February 3-month period. This map on the left, this is a map of the height anomaly. So this isn't temperature per se. Oftentimes it correlates pretty well, but if anything, there tends to be, in that set of analog years, anomalously low heights sort of over the Northeast to over into the North Atlantic. So again, cool has been favored in these years. This pattern in the analog years puts Pennsylvania in a northwesterly flow. So on the chillier side, but also that flow tends to lead to dryness. So based on that analog signal, again, it's sort of a chilly, dry signal for this part of the country. It's also a dry signal again for California. That also would tend to team up with the La Nina that is currently in effect. So if you use La Nina as your analog and you happen to use my analog, both of those would suggest dry for California. The thing though that, again, to provide some snow lovers hope, Kevin, and most of you looking at you. So this took a little bit of digging, but at least around here in Pennsylvania, those analog years would tend to favor a sort of snowier first half and then a not very snowy at all second half. So again, for any of you that are curious on the data, this is the list 9 Pennsylvania observing sites that have fairly reliable snow records for at least 100 years, or close to 100 years. This is the number out of 14. The number of Decembers when the December snow total was above average. And so if you exclude Philly, which it was only 6 out of 14, all the other sites, it was at least half of them. Not a super strong signal. But if anything, when you look at December and January, it was sort of around or slightly above half of the years were snowier than average. The stronger signal was the fact that February's, it did not snow a lot in that set of years. And so again, with 7 being the midpoint, this is the number of years at each of these sites where the February snow total was below average. Four of these 9 cities, it was at least 10 out of 14 times. Erie, it was 12. And you can see the 9 being the lowest number here. So if there's any sort of signal tied to snow out of the years that dropped out for me, it's that if you're going to get snow, you'd be inclined to get it earlier instead of later, which I personally, if there was any chance that that happen to work out as a reliable analog signal, I'd be all for it because I'd rather have snow in December and I'd rather get spring underway quicker. Because lately we've been in this habit around here recently where it seems like, you know, March and April and even into May, it can just be pretty awful sometimes. And so I'm not really all about that. So as far as current weather is concerned, we've got some intermittent light rain showers out there. This is essentially part of a dying shortwave aloft that's in the process of moving north and northeastward. So the forcing's not tremendously good. If anything, part of what's helping this to survive is the fact that the air mass that has been originating in the southeast and is now moving northward, it's pretty moist for this time of the year. In fact, if I get my zoom block out of the way, the air mass that is moving through the Ohio Valley and into parts of western Pennsylvania right now, it is within the top 10% most humid for this time of the year. This is show you how I got to here too, for what it's worth. So this is from the E-wall. If you come down here on the left-hand side of the screen, there's this link. It says current hour departure from average. This is still going off of the old 30-year normals, but the pattern overall will still be fairly similar. It'll default to the temperature map, so that's what's showing now. Down here in the lower left, this will show you areas that are, or stations that are having a top 10% warm or cool reading for this hour on this day. So the noon observation, basically, Eastern time. So as far as temperature is concerned, you can see there's more stations throughout the nation that are in the top 10% warm than cool. But as far as the moisture profiles in the atmosphere go, the dew points, again, anywhere with a green station identifier here, that's a station that is having a noon hour on Halloween that is in the top 10% most humid. So this air mass that's been lurking to our south and west and is actually now moving in, it's anomalously moist for this time of the year. So that's helping these showers that are otherwise rather disorganized, patchy, few and far between, to survive a little bit better than they otherwise would be with this collapsing system. So latest radar, again, there are some showers around through the rest of this afternoon. We're still going to have to allow for this at times. Not everyone will see them. If you see a shower, it's probably going to be light. The more notable shortwave is still off to our south and west. It will come through overnight, but the main area of moisture till it gets here will be off to our east. So this is 0Z this evening. This is 8 o'clock local time. This is hello. What's up? Sure. Oh, would you like to ask it now? I think the Phillies will play. I don't think it's going to be enough rain to delay them or interrupt play.
What sport is it?
Baseball. Oh, fighting words. This is precipitable water. And so this gives you an idea of how much moisture is sort of in the area of the atmosphere above your heads. So late tonight into the overnight hours, when the more impressive upper level wave is coming through, again, it's got the better lift, but by this time, these brighter colors here, which represents more moisture, the best moisture is east of State College. So overnight, if there's an area that stands the best chance for more organized showers, once again, it would be favoring eastern Pennsylvania, probably I-81, and points to the east. Again, it can probably shower occasionally in central and western Pennsylvania. It's probably lighter, and those showers are probably fewer and farther between. Into tomorrow, it'll take a little bit for that energy to fully move away. There's still enough moisture around that there's probably some showers around during the day tomorrow. Once again, not enough to ruin the day. But you might just want to keep the rain gear handy, maybe keep the umbrella handy, but I wouldn't necessarily plan on needing to use it. This is what it looks like right now on the visible satellite. I was in the process of getting back to town today, so I don't know about here, but where I was in eastern Pennsylvania, the sunrise was incredible this morning. Not sure if it was too clouded over here at the. Okay. But in any case, we've been in this sort of thickening clouds, lowering and thickening of the clouds sort of regime. The main area of low pressure right now is swirling back over the Ohio Valley and the southern Great Lakes. Until this fully moves through, though, we're on sort of the business end of this system. Again, we already talked about the fact that the air mass that is just out ahead of this area of low pressure, for the time of the year especially, it's a little more humid, or it's a little more moist than you might expect for late October and early November. So even though this is not a very strong, overly impressive system, the fact that it's at least working with a lot of moisture, that's helping to keep the presence of a lot of these clouds and showers around. This is, so this is the 500 millibar map from 12Z this morning. There's the upper level reflection of the system that's to our west. Just one closed height line aloft. It's not very strong, and in fact, over the next couple of hours, this is going to open and get reabsorbed into the main branch of the jet stream, and pretty much come through with very little fanfare locally. But again, until it fully moves through, there's quite a bit of goop to go. So for the rest of today, I would not bank on seeing the sunshine. Some showers at times, but certainly not enough to ruin trick-or-treating tonight. Or once again, I would personally say I would expect the Phillies to play, even with some better moisture and better dynamics east of us near Philadelphia and the Philadelphia area. I don't think it would be enough to ruin the baseball game. Although coincidentally, yesterday I was watching a football game, the Giants and the Seahawks, and the referee in that game referred to the Seahawks as the Mariners. So had a bit of word salad. I have so many tabs open, I'm lost. Okay. Hello. Here we go. Current weather besides the satellite and radar, here's what's going on. Temperatures are mainly in the 50s statewide. At the present time, we'll probably top out close to or within reach of 60 this afternoon. We are in this situation where we're in a prime spot for warm advection, which is absolutely going on today. It's being balanced out by a lack of sunshine, though. So warm advection, but not a lot of sun. So temperatures, again, they'll end up within reach of 60. As far as the high side is concerned, not too far from seasonable levels today. The mornings, though, I mean, this morning starting out largely in the 30s, 40s, even some low 50s out there, which compared to the last few, it was a much milder start to the day. It just won't exactly translate to a much warmer finish because we don't have the sun. Dew point maps over here to the right. You can see, especially where the winds, which is this lower panel, where those winds are the strongest today, on the order of 10 to 20 knots, especially in the Ohio Valley. That's really helping to transport some of that moisture that's been lurking in the southeast pretty far north. We've got some dew points that are above 60 degrees, even up into parts of Ohio, and there's even a few observations of it in extreme southern Michigan. So for this time of the year, that's quite a bit of moisture. As far as where we go from here, again, this is now the GFS model. This is the disturbance to our west. That is, again, it's certainly not that strong for this time of the year, but we are on the business end of this disturbance. So warm advection, some of this moisture transport up here. We showed you the satellite image, a lot of clouds to get through still, but over the next 12 hours or so, you'll be able to watch that this system is moving northward, not in a strengthening state, It's trying to essentially go up and meet up with the jet stream. By tomorrow morning, it's still trying to come through Pennsylvania. So again, if the trough axis is sort of, Erie to Pittsburgh-ish at this time, most of Pennsylvania during the morning hours of tomorrow is still east of the trough axis. So not a ton of moisture to work with, not a great amount of lift to work with, but because we are still east of this trough axis, we can't totally rule out some showers during the day on Tuesday. Again, few and far between, they would be light. After this system ends up leaving, a ridge of high pressure will attempt to crest overhead by the middle of the week. There's some of this leftover energy that festers down to our south, but in general, we'll watch a ridge of high pressure crest overhead for basically Wednesday and right into the weekend. The main action the rest of this week will be in the western states. So fairly notable trough looks to dig in to the west coast as early as Wednesday afternoon. This will bring some beneficial rain, not just to California, where of course they desperately need it, but until recently, it's been very warm and dry in the Pacific Northwest as well. There's been wildfires, record highs, much drier than average. So beneficial moisture for the West. Once this system starts rolling out by the end of the week, depending on the track of it, how far south it tracks, because I lived in Colorado for a few years, I'm also sort of in tune with Denver's weather recently as well. Denver has not measured snow yet this year, but if this low takes an ideal track, could get Denver some accumulating snow later this week. If the GFS is correct here verbatim, it would not, because this would be way too far south to get measurable snow in Denver. But if this ends up tracking more like straight across southern Colorado, there'd be a chance. This is also the time of the year where in the southern U.S., the jet stream's in the process of migrating back to the south, but there's still enough warmth and moisture around in the southern U.S. that there's a secondary peak in severe weather season. So later this week, we might start to be hearing some news of some severe weather. What's up? Yeah, again, yeah, you should get ready for it. But yeah, big disturbance rolling into the plains later this week with intensifying area of low pressure at the surface. That's probably going to mean some rain, some thunderstorms, potentially some severe weather in the south out ahead of it. There seems to be some pretty good agreement that this system will eventually move up to our west next weekend. At this point, between much of the global model suite, by the time we get to later this week and the weekend, most of the models have the general idea of this disturbance digging into the plains. We're comfortably in the grips of a big ridge of high pressure aloft. It's a little hard to see, but those height values there, that's as modeled, a 588 decameter ridge over the eastern U.S., which for early November, that will enjoy that while it lasts. This would be one of those early November weeks that you'd really want to enjoy because you just know what can be on the way. But again, as far as the GFS is concerned, that next area of interest would be riding up through the Great Lakes into the weekend. This is, of course, the time of the year where not only do you have to be concerned about some thunderstorms, maybe severe out ahead of the systems, but if there's enough cold air lurking behind it, swaths of snow that go on the cold side of these systems. So we could have one of those instances later this week, maybe some severe weather in the south and a swath of snow in the cooler air through the northern plains and the Dakotas. That's the GFS for what it's worth. The European model, similar setup as far as this week is concerned. Here's our current system to the west, which is trying to decide, does it rejoin the jet stream? Does it slide east? But in any case, not in very much a strengthening manner. So during the day tomorrow, Europeans got the same idea, system trying to come through here. Until it does, we have to allow for the threat of a couple of showers. But most of us, especially during the day tomorrow, will escape it dry. The European, again, it tries to crest this ridge overhead as early as Wednesday, got some energy being held back here. For us around here, I don't think at this point this is too much to be concerned about. I think as early as Wednesday, the weather around here is quite nice. And then, if anything, just only gets nicer by Thursday, Friday, and to start the weekend. Europeans got the same idea by the weekend. That next system really digging far to the south, and then trying to close off, get its act together, and head up through the plains into the Great Lakes by the weekend. I don't know if anyone in the room is traveling to Bloomington this weekend. There's the next Penn State game on Saturday. At the moment, for what it's worth, the weather service in Bloomington has very slight chance of showers, otherwise partly sunny and a high of 68. Not bad football weather for the first weekend in November. Anybody in here actually going out to Bloomington? No? Well, if you change your mind in the next 6 days, it doesn't look awful, but there might be a shower. So many tabs, I'm lost. This is another product I like to look at in terms of getting an idea of, the air mass that's around. Not only is it above or below average, but is it something, record challenging for this time of the year? For any of you who haven't been on this website, best way to get here, if you're interested, is to Google Tomer Berg weather. There's the name right there. But this site, it's got a lot of good stuff, but no, you're fine. I generally like to look at this for the air mass percentile rank. So that's what I have highlighted here. This is looking at 850. When you start to get into the colors, that goes to represent an air mass that is essentially a top 10 warm or cool. And then the contours will gradually get colored in as you go from top 10% to top and bottom 2%, 1%, and finally warmest or coldest overall. Right now, we're in a warmer than average regime around here, which isn't going to change at all this week. In the wake of that system, once that ridge of high pressure starts building in, that'll allow a very anomalously warm air mass for this time of the year that will be out through the plains first to start coming eastward. You'll notice by later this week, the west with that big system dropping in there by later this week, that will also have a lot of cool air associated with it for this time of the year. The air mass dropping into the west, some of this will be close to essentially as cold as it gets for this time of the year, at least at 850 millibars. So especially in the Sierra, those snow levels will start to come down pretty far. Around here, again, what starts as just sort of a warmer than average week will eventually get farther and farther from average in the warm direction. By Saturday, at least as modeled here, the air mass in Pennsylvania by the upcoming weekend will be in the top 10% warmest for this time of the year. That'll translate to 60s, maybe even some low 70s at the surface throughout Pennsylvania later this week into the weekend. So again, November weather you really want to enjoy because we know what's coming. Again, as modeled by the GFS, as we go farther out in time, if anything, it just gets a little bit warmer. So this would be out ahead of that system going through the plains. A lot of warm air coming north out ahead of it, potentially early next week, but that is a week away. Thought I'd finish up by just looking out a little bit farther to see if there's any sign of a flip back in the temperature department. This is a page off the e-wall for those of you who, I'll just start over to show you how I got there. On the Penn State e-wall, this second tab up here, this MREF, stands for Medium Range Ensemble Forecast System. But this is what I brought up there was just the ensemble mean plot from the GFS, the most recent complete run, which is this one. So this is an upper level pattern, warm basically translating to air mass temperature. So orange, red blobs, warmer than average, blue, purple blobs, cooler than average. Later this week, let's see, where are we here? This is Wednesday afternoon, essentially. You can see fairly good agreement among all the ensemble members that that ridge will begin building in here by Wednesday afternoon. I think that even if there's some reflection of a disturbance, it's far enough to our south that it really doesn't affect our weather sensibly here on Wednesday. So if you ask me, Wednesday's sort of a partly to mostly sunny, on the warm side of average kind of day once we get rid of tomorrow's clouds and isolated showers. But fairly good agreement that by the middle of the week, this next ridge of high pressure is building in here. Also, a lot of good agreement that that next big disturbance digs into the west. By this is now Saturday. This is Saturday afternoon right here. Again, from a pattern standpoint, this is a more high confidence forecast than we've had as of late. Fairly good agreement that we're still very much in a big ridge of high pressure. There's a disturbance in the plains by this point. Again, I'd expect some severe weather and thunderstorms out ahead of it. Maybe enough cool air on the cold side of the storm for a swath of snow going up through the plains and the Great Lakes. By, let's see, that's the 8th. So that's what, next Monday? This is where things start to get a little bit tricky. Of course, we are getting farther out in time, so things do get more uncertain. But by the time we get to early next week, I mentioned we're probably still warm around here until that next system maybe or maybe doesn't come through. But after that, once we get closer to mid-November, there are some signs that the pattern will try to at least become less warm. This is now out by the 13th, so this would be the middle to end of next week. There are some signs that by this point, any sort of overall warm signal would go away. And a big reason for that is what's going on upstream. And so you'll notice at the current time, for those of you who are into any sort of, teleconnections, long range forecasting, for around here in the eastern US, a lot of what happens here, we can at least get some clues to what's causing it by looking out near or just west of Alaska. So at the current time, or at least later this week, big ridges of high pressure with warm air in the eastern US tend to teleconnect well, we would say, with big ridges of high pressure in western Alaska, the Aleutians, and the Bering Sea region. So that's this ridge of high pressure here. So typically, if we see a big ridge of high pressure in western Alaska and the Aleutians, you'll also tend to find one in the eastern United States. After that, when we get into sort of the second week of November, that ridge of high pressure starts sliding east. And so if there's fairly good agreement by mid-November, essentially the second week of November, that now this ridge is more over Alaska instead of west of Alaska, then that would argue that the whole pattern might be trying to shift enough that around here it's not crazy warm, and instead some of the cooler weather that would be to our west would start sliding east. So again, as far as the rest of this week is concerned, I think there's very little doubt about it that we're in a very nice pattern. Weather Service sort of echoes my sentiments that assuming that that's disturbance to the south by Wednesday stays far enough to the south, I don't think it's much to be concerned about. So tomorrow, a couple of showers around, probably, I'd honestly bet we stay dry here tomorrow, but if it showers briefly, I would not be surprised. But next 24 hours, clouds, a couple of showers, we have to get out of here. Temperatures hovering around seasonable because we won't see the sun a whole lot. So we're sort of battling this warm advection but lack of sunshine type of problem. Wednesday, sun comes out, temperatures are sort of off to the races. And again, from Wednesday, at least into the first half of the weekend, I see very little reason to question a generally sunny, generally warm pattern around here. Highs probably climbing to the 60s, getting close to 70 by the weekend. Overnight lows well above average, predominantly in the 40s. So for early November, can't ask for much better weather than this, essentially starting Tuesday night. My advice would be to enjoy it as best you can, because signs do point to the fact that starting the second week of November, things probably flip the other way. So with that, I will end. If anyone has any questions, by all means, I'll be happy to answer them. But I've talked enough, and I will talk no more. You're welcome.